Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GM. It is your guy, Boulanger. Up next, do the Baltimore Ravens need to change their ways? Let's talk. I first want to start, man, and I want to thank you guys for connecting with us, man. We're almost at that 900 subscriber mark. So I want to let you know I really appreciate it. Do me a favor, hit the like button so the content can get out to more people. And if you have not subscribed, by all means, please hit that subscribe button. Let's talk. The question of today is, do the Baltimore Ravens need to change the Ravens way? In fact, what is the Ravens way? What does it mean to play like a Raven? Is it the organizational culture? Is it the brotherhood that's established? Is it the family atmosphere that is said to be created? Is it a type of player? Is it superstardom? Is it grit and grind? Is it a defensive-minded run-first ideation? What is the Ravens way? Whatever it is, I'm kind of sitting in the position that we need to adopt some different practices of the Ravens way. You see, I know that the conversation around the NFL world and even including the Ravens content creation world is that many teams who are contending need to build their team like the Philadelphia Eagles. And I am opposed to that in some ways. I think that, as I've mentioned previously, there are 4 teams that the Baltimore Ravens specifically could take some tips from. One was the Rams, the 49ers, the Eagles, and also the Chiefs, all teams who have visited the Super Bowl, and 3 of the 4 of those teams have actually won a Super Bowl or 2 over the last decade. And so there are several teams that we could take some tips from, but not really build like the Eagles. Part of the reason you can't build like the Eagles is because the Eagles are already built. That offensive line, best in the league, built. Having the best running back in the league, established. Having a top 10 quarterback, depending on how you look at it, already in place. Having the best defense in the league, already established. So you can't build like the Eagles. You can only look at your team and adopt some practices that may be implemented to make your team better, right? But I've got a different take today. Part of the conversation here at the GM over the last week or so is free agency and how we could create cap space and who we should bring in. And it wasn't really with the Eagles in mind. And today's conversation is not with the Eagles in mind neither. In fact, I think the Baltimore Ravens should take some tips from the Buffalo Bills, a little further north than the Philadelphia Eagles. What, Boulanger? We ain't taking nothing from Buffalo. Well, I think we should. You see, the Buffalo Bills have been consistently in contention, and they even advanced further than the Baltimore Ravens this season to the AFC Championship, going through Baltimore to get there. So there must be something that they're doing right. We can't just hang it on the fact that we had some bad play in the first quarter and then also again in the fourth quarter. We can't just hang it on that. We have to begin to look at how teams operate in order to identify some winning ways, especially when it comes to deep playoff runs. But more specifically, I'm talking about maybe it's time for the Ravens to depart the tradition of the Ravens way and let go of some of the long-standing Ravens who may be kind of holding them back a little bit, who may be good players but have never really been great players. You see, what the Buffalo Bills did last season that I think we may be able to take some practices of is they went through their roster and got rid of the malcontent players. They got rid of dead and dying contracts, those contracts that were heavy in value but low in production. And they just kind of revamped the whole thing, right? They moved on from Stephon Diggs and brought in a young talent like Keon Coleman. They moved off of or allowed Gabe Davis to walk and brought in a veteran like Curtis Samuel, and then just kind of added some pieces around Shakur. They went defensively. They got rid of some old and dying contracts and brought in some new life and just kind of became more of a stable team. And what they did long term is they cleaned up their books. And so I think that that's the position that we need to be in this offseason. You see, we've had a similar conversation from 19 to 20 to 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25. What is that conversation? Is that we have been in quote unquote cap hell, right? Starting every season either at a deficit, that is the off season, or either just very little in cap space. Right. And with understanding, we're not losing as many free agents as we did last season. But I'm just wondering, is it not time? Is it not time to go throughout this roster and purge? I know Ronnie Stanley is a free agent and he's listed as the best left tackle available, but is it time to just move on from Ronnie Stanley? I know that Marlon Humphrey was a Pro Bowl, All-Pro level player this season, but is it time to move on from Marlon Humphrey? I know that Mark Andrews is a former All-Pro, but is it time to move on from Mark Andrews? I'm just asking you guys to kind of consider, right? Those guys have been a part of the Ravens for at least 7+ seasons, and we haven't done much with them. We haven't won. And so to say that we couldn't win without them is not something we can prove, right? We've won without Marlon Humphrey. He was hurt and we still won. We've won without Ronnie Stanley. He was hurt and we still won. We've even won without Mark Andrews. He was hurt and we still won. So the question is it time to just move forward and purge our roster a little bit and get some young, dynamic talent in to replace the old, wily veterans? It's a question. You see, we got the quarterback figured out, right? And we got at least 2/5 of an offensive line figured out. We have the backfield figured out. We have the tight end room figured out, even if Mark Andrews moves on. We have at least 2 of the wide receivers figured out. We have a part of the defensive front figured out. We have 1/2 of the linebacker room figured out. And we have at least 3 of the 4 secondary pieces figured out. So we have an infrastructure with some young players, but is it not time to just have a purge? I'm just wondering. See, because the Ravens' way is to hold on to guys a little longer than necessary. The Ravens' way has showed itself to be overpay for guys who've been good but never great. See, that has led us to this bad cap situation. Let's go in deep. You see, when you really think about the conversation of a bad cap, it's part of the reason why we couldn't sign an edge rusher like Zadarius Smith. It's part of the reason why we couldn't retain CJ Mosley. It's part of the reason why we couldn't keep an edge rusher like a Matt Judon, because we had bad cap situation. But when we lost those guys, Lamar Jackson hadn't been paid yet. See, that's the conversation right now. I've heard content creators talk about Lamar Jackson and his salary, and that's part of the reason why we can't make any kind of significant moves in free agency. That's not a true statement. See, part of the reason why, the biggest part of the reason why the Baltimore Ravens can't make a substantial move in free agency is because of the bad contracts they've doled out to players who've been good but never great. You see, when they paid Ronnie Stanley $100 million, basically, they made him the highest paid left tackle in the league. He was good, but never great. And he already had some previous injury concerns. When they paid Marlon Humphrey and made him one of, if not the highest paid cornerback, he was good, but never great. When they went out and got Marcus Williams, he was good, but never great. And he was never good for the Ravens. When they went out and traded for Roquan Smith, what was he? You guys know the answer. Yeah, good, but never great. And then off of one breakout year for Metabike, what was he? Good, but never great. But the theme is that when the Baltimore Ravens have paid those 6 guys I think I named their new contracts, they made them the highest paid or one of the highest paid at that position. And when you look at the return on investment, it has not been there for any of those contracts. Metabike had a down year. Roquan Smith had a down year. Marlon Humphrey got paid and got injured. Ronnie Stanley got paid and got injured. Marcus Williams got paid and got injured. So the return on investment wasn't there. And so the reason why we have some areas on this roster that have been weak and vulnerable consistently is because we've given out bad contracts. So no, sir, no, ma'am, it's not the Lamar Jackson contract that's the issue. It's all of these other bad contracts that have been the issue. Isn't it funny how you never hear anybody except me maybe talk about the bad contract that was made of BK, Roquan, Marcus Williams, so on and so forth, Marlon Humphrey, Ronnie Stanley? But you hear people point to Lamar Jackson's heavy contract as being the culprit, and it's just not. Think about it this way. If you take Meta BK's $98-ish million, let's call it $100 million, let's just make it even, right? You bust that down and make it two contracts, $250 million contracts. I wonder, could you get two quality players versus one player? If you take, what's that dude's name? Roquan Smith, you take his contract, bust it down into two contracts, so you get two $50 million guys. I wonder, could those two quality players measure up to the one just above average good player in Roquan? If you take Marcus Williams' safety contract and bust that down to two $35 million contracts, I wonder, could we have gotten two quality players out of that $70 million? Ronnie Stanley, I wonder, could we have bust that down and made two offensive linemen of quality? Marlon Humphrey, $100 million. I wonder, could we have bust that down and made it two quality secondary pieces? You see, took those 5 contracts and busted down and made 10 players, 10 quality players. Think about what I'm saying. Am I saying these guys shouldn't have got their money? No, I want NFL players, the basketball players, the baseball players. I want them to get all of the money that somebody's willing to pay them. My complaint or my issue is, for the Ravens, we've paid out big money and we have not got a return on investment, except for the Lamar Jackson contract. He had to fight for his money, ask for a trade before he got paid. When he finally got paid, he did nothing more than go out and win the MVP and lead the Ravens to the AFC Championship. He turns around and has his best season ever, a historic NFL season for a QB, and becomes an All-Pro and probably should have won the MVP. That's what he's done since he got paid. All of those other contracts, those guys stepped off the ledge and went down. So the hope is that a couple of those guys who will remain on this roster will have a bounce back season, but there is no guarantee. So I'm just wondering, is it time to break down this roster and purge some of those old contracts and get some new life, get some new dogs in the house, so to speak, and see if we can make a run? Hey, it worked for Buffalo, and they don't have half of the young talent that we have. They don't have a young lion like Kyle Hamilton, who actually is going to be the highest paid safety in the league. See, because we have a history of that, right? They don't have a young guy like an Isaiah Likely waiting to take his spot as the #1 tight end for the Ravens. We have a young guy in a Roger Rosengarten, a young guy in a Tyler Lindenbaum, who can form 2/5 of a good offensive line. We have a young Zay Flowers who's an Pro Bowl level tight end. A Pro Bowl level wide receiver. And we have 11 draft picks. And I think it's time now that maybe we consider moving on from Ronnie Stanley. Well, your question may be, well, who are we going to get to replace him? Well, that's the work of the GM. That's GM work, what I talked about several videos ago. He has to do his job. Right? See, because I believe that holding on to some of these older veterans compromise the Baltimore Ravens' ability to sign the younger talent. See, giving Ronnie Stanley a 2-year extension at his market value price of $40 million compromises an upgrade at left guard. Holding on to Mark Andrews, and they're not going to keep him at that $16 million cap hit, right? So, but holding on to him would mean you either have to give him an extension or restructure. Well, because he doesn't have an extra year, you can't really restructure. So that would mean they would have to extend him. What does an extension do? Get in the way of Isaiah Likely being retained next season. right? When you look at extending Marlon Humphrey, because he has a $25 million cap number, but he's a $18 million base salary, I believe that's correct. But extending him just to keep him gets in the way of signing Kyle Hamilton. You see, the problem is all of these $100 million deals that the Baltimore Ravens have made and not got a real return on investment. See, we feel better about Madubuike if he had to come back out and been dominant. We feel better about Roquan if he had to come back out and had the same kind of season that he had in 2023. Right? But that didn't happen. And so we can't do anything with Roquan or Madubuike only because they're too young into their contract. So a trade would cost us too much in dead cap money. And a cut, which, I'm not saying cut them either, it would just cost too much. It wouldn't make financial sense. So it's better just to keep them with no restructure, keep them on their current deal, look at their contracts next season. But those other three guys that I mentioned, I think it may be time just to move forward and restock and retool, and let's see if fresh life in Baltimore makes a difference. I'm your guy Boulanger. This is the GM, and I'm out.